Training in Zen Buddhist monasteries. As is customary in the Far East, the young pupils of a monastery who are destined for priesthood seldom go there of their own accord. Generally, they are obeying the wish of their parents. But they make this wish so much their own that it might be their own impulse. Otherwise, they would find no satisfaction. For the career of a priest is not yet exactly inviting, a rigorous life full of privations, yet its poverty is compensated by such inner riches that they could not exchange it for any other. Apart from these pupils, there are others who come to practice in the meditation halls in Zen Buddhist monasteries, pupils of all grades who are preparing for a career or have already finished their training, among them artists of all kinds. These come for a temporary stay of their own accord, somehow attracted by the spirit of Zen and believing that closer contact with it will give them something which they may not ignore, not only for the sake of their profession, but for their own sakes. These older pupils have already been molded by the experience of life, or by their profession, and have perhaps proved their ability. And that is of value for their selection and admission, for their being singled out by a master. They already have a fairly wide range of duties, and they may also have gone through a stiff course of training the will and the intellect. Surprising as it may seem, this is considered important. For what they are to learn in the monastery, concentration in order to meditate, requires the capacity to concentrate on the same thing for hours, days, and weeks on end. This presupposes firmness and steadiness of will, no less than a clear intellect. The predominantly emotional type of person finds this very hard. Indeed, he may make no headway at all. A helpful factor is that the Japanese has learned from childhood to submit to discipline. It is astonishing and, for the European, almost inconceivable how much time the Japanese spend in restraining and controlling gestures which can at most be regarded as aesthetic faults. Say someone slams the door in a temper. In the East, this is not taken as the expression of a forceful personality, nor is it regarded as a lapse which should not be taken seriously. Anyone who does such a thing will not, like the European, deem it justified by the situation, or excuse himself by saying that his feelings ran away with him. He will go back to the door, open it, close it softly, and say to it, "I beg your pardon." Thereafter, he will take care how he shuts doors. Or perhaps he has received a parcel. He tears it open immediately and throws the string and paper away. Too late, he remembers that he has been lost by his impatience and curiosity. In future, he will compose himself, carefully undo the string and wrapping and put them aside, and only then examine the contents. Or again, he is expecting an important letter. It arrives. How easy it is to yield to the impulse to tear it open and hastily scan it. So he condemns himself to laying the letter aside and turning to something else until he has conquered his haste and the letter is forgotten. When he sets his hand to it later, he opens it as though the envelope were something precious. A European will think, they have time. No. They do not have time, they take time. Or he will say, how fussy they are. No, they want to become unfussy. He will ask, what does it all lead to? To this, that those who are patient in small and trivial things, and control themselves, will one day have the same mastery in great and important matters. Great value, therefore, is set on moral character and the observance of the social and ethical order, not as the final goal. Zen gets beyond that standpoint, but as an initial stage. This training of will and intellect is complemented and supported by a spare, simple diet, physical work for recreation, with no more than the necessary amount of sleep on a hard bed. Discipline is exceedingly strict. Punctuality, conscientiousness, self-control are demanded, an ability to withstand heat and cold regardless of the weather. From this point of view, the influence of Zen Buddhism on the samurai is understandable, In fact, the samurai spirit was largely molded by it. Even today, the instruction in archery and swordsmanship is distinguished by its strict discipline. The early hours of morning are chosen for practice, when one is clear-headed. The change in the seasons makes no difference. The coldest and the hottest times of the day are preferred. The training of the younger pupils is different. They are in every respect beginners, unwritten pages. The master must first get to know them before he can put them on the Zen way. Hence, to begin with, their activities are quite different from what might be expected. They have to clean rooms, work in the kitchen, in the fields and gardens. All the time they are covertly watched by the instructor. Not only speed, skill, and taste count, even more importantness are willingness, zeal, conscientiousness, unselfishness, readiness to serve. They go through a kind of testing time, with the undeceivable eye of the master upon them. Least of all, he watches how they behave towards him. It goes without saying that they treat him with reverence, but this is not revealing enough. And how they behave with their fellow pupils, what they talk about, is not characteristic enough. For even in a monastery, the general style and atmosphere are something they can adapt to. They can always act up. Therefore, to pay attention to what someone does not do is often more important than noting what he does. On the other hand, the handling of things, tools, etc., especially when the pupil thinks he is unobserved, tells the master a great deal. He has reduced this to a fine art, and can probably read more out of it than a graphologist can from a person's handwriting. With his pupils, he is uncompromising, strict, brusque, their antagonist in the truest sense of the word. But it is the severity of goodness, unswayed by moods and emotions. In the history of Zen Buddhism, there are many examples of a master's pitiless severity, but the pupil cannot yet see, as he will later, that everything was done out of compassion. Once the pupil has reached a certain point, the real instruction, which may, with reservation, be called spiritual, begins. The specifically spiritual training starts with purification of the power of vision. First, one is required to perceive everything that is present in all its sensuous fullness, including everything that is displeasing or repellent, and to hold it permanently in the mind. Again and again, you have to immerse yourself in the contents of perception, until you know them by heart and can at will call them to mind in such a way that they present themselves without loss of clarity. When you can do this, you must learn to rise above it, to apprehend what you are looking at as if from the inside, to look through it and grasp its essence, just as the painter does with a few concentrated strokes. From this, we can see how much art owes to Zen. Then, when that has been fully mastered, an intensification can be aimed at, holding the landscape, the fields with trees, flowers, cattle, and people, so intently in your gaze that in spite of the wood, you still see the trees, and then thinning out the reality of the detail until you can grasp the unchanging character of the whole and retain it in its most concentrated form. Finally, even this vision of pure essence must be transcended. You must be able to picture the world itself, the cosmos, and ultimately infinite space, thereby expanding the power of vision still further. It is possible that everything will drift off into vagueness at this point, but even so, these exercises are not without effect. Practicing the power of vision does not lead only to increased capacity for concentration as such. Those with mystical experience who have tasks to perform in real life also need this enhanced power of vision, as we shall see. Only when this stage has been reached does the real work of meditation begin.